All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session organized by Vodan Africa. This will be the 11th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. My name is Charles Kahiro, and I am the Creative Director at TravelWorks Africa, which is a leading provider for consulting services in organizational management, learning, and development. Now, for today's session, will be led by Eric, the International Science Coordinator at the Go Fair International Support and Coordination Office. He was on a bit of a break, not really a break, he was a bit busy, but we've been able to get him back. So welcome back, Eric. And we'll be going through the homework that we set out last week. So there was an Excel sheet that all the country teams were to fill with regards to the metadata components that were covered last time. So we are going to go through it today, highlighting how it's supposed to be filled. Our hope is that we can see that some teams have filled it, others are yet to do so. But this will be a live exercise. So I can see Francisca has already shared the link to the spreadsheet in the chat box so that everyone can follow along and we can make the amendments to our sections as Eric goes on describing how the components should be filled out. So be sure to pay attention and participate. As usual, during the presentation, let's try and keep our mics muted unless we are asking a question directly. Like we said, this will be a practical and live session. So if you have some issues with filling your sections as they are being described, just feel free to ask so we can cover it instantly as we move along. If you have any additional questions, you can type them into the chat box and I will bring them up during the presentation. But we will also have a Q&A session at the end just to make sure. All right, with that, I hand over to Eric.
Great, thank you, Charles. And indeed, Charles, it would be great when you can help to maybe moderate the questions or answers here. It's a great idea for this to be a very interactive session, I think. And I think it's an opportunity for everyone who, in the course of this exercise, who has questions can ask them. And I think we all learn from that. So I think it's great for this to be pretty interactive today. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we talked about last week in setting up this exercise. And, I keep redrawing this picture, revising it, trying to figure out the best way to represent things. But here's an example of, I should say, first off, because we're doing things a little different today. So I hope everyone can see my screen, and that is two screens today. On the right are my slides, and I think you can see that. And then on the left is the spreadsheet that we'll be working in later today. So I just want everyone to be aware that we'll be using both panels today. And for now, I'm in the screen, or I'm in the slides, and I see the image here of the hospital. We have there at some hospital labeled Hospital A fair data point, and it happens to be a vote-on fair data point, and it happens to be located in a country B. And the fair data point has some metadata components in it. And these metadata basically announce the existence of a case report form down below in the database. And this database could be within the hospital environment, or let's say the server that runs this database could be in the hospital environment, or maybe the hospital contracts it out to another organization. But in any case, the hospital is the owner of this data and they are responsible for it. Within the hospital, there's a record-keeping process. So patient diagnosed with COVID for example, have records, and there's a process for that. And we have a data steward there in the hospital who will try to verify some of this data and get it into this electronic case report format. And then it can be announced by this fair data point. And I think this is pretty familiar. It's our basic schema. But I just want to indicate, that when we talk about a hospital, I label it with a particular hospital, or if I talk about a country, these are all metadata components. And these are all things that either are already asked for in the fair data point metadata, or they could be other things that we want to augment later on with the fair data point. So these could be other metadata components that we want to augment with the fair data point. And when what we envision, right, is a growing network of these fair data points, each of them located in a hospital environment or maybe a university clinical setting, ideally, and each of these fair data points will be unique and they should be findable. They should have metadata that represents the unique stakeholders who are owning that data and running that data, the policies and regulations under which that data is kept, and all the local information. So all these fair data points will be labeled with either their hospital identification or their country specificity, etc. And when the fair data point is successfully installed on a server, you will get a window like this, which is a web client that's helping the humans see. It's basically a human interface to the fair data point. So it presents information on the fair data point such that a human can see it. But if you go to the edit button here in the fair data point and you have admin credentials, you can also edit the metadata in this fair data point. And it basically looks like, if you've seen it already, I don't know, but it'll basically look like filling in a web form. And there's questions, you basically supply the answers and click save, and then that becomes part of the fair data point. And it's all machine actionable, yeah? And then the last thing I just want to remind us about is that in the fair data point, there's essentially 4 layers of metadata. And at the highest layer, it is the fair data point itself. And this is where we will likely call, recognize this as a vote on fair data point. We have ways of making it possible to designate this as a vote on fair data point. And we can also designate the country there. And also things like the publisher, which would be maybe the hospital or the clinic. At the next layer down, there's a catalog, and there can be one or many catalogs, and those too should be owned by the hospital. Within a catalog, there could be one or many data sets, and one of these data sets will be these electronic case report forms. And then every form itself will have a distribution, which is basically essentially the file type or the file format. And we were lucky enough to be able to get a file format in this RDF format with a conceptual model behind it. So it's really pretty deep semantics. It's pretty, the machine will be able to track this quite well. So we have really machine actionable metadata here. And one other thing I want to mention is that in general, the properties from a higher level are inherited to those things in the lower level in the fair data point. Designation at the fair data point level, it's understood that the catalog, data set, and distribution, unless otherwise stated, will also belong to the same country. And so there is some inheritance here, and that makes it a little bit easier when we create our metadata. And it's also something just to be aware of, so we know exactly how the fair data point is working. And what we had said last week was in a spreadsheet that I handed out to you, there was 32 questions that took you through the metadata components of each of these 4 layers. And at the top of the spreadsheet here was a designation of different fair data points. Here, with a technical lead behind them, with an ownership, with a coordinator. So these are the potential fair data points that we have. And these are all in a different stage of being deployed. So some are calling home, some are still in the process of becoming deployed. And what I suggested was that that the stakeholders who are responsible for each of these fair data points could try to independently complete this list of 32 questions. And if the question was a little bit ambiguous, or if you didn't fully understand it, that was okay. And you could just say, yeah, don't understand, or need more information here. But in any case, you could just go ahead and answer in whatever way you would like. There was no need to supply any kind of sophisticated coding here. It was just kind of, filling in the blank as you would any form. And either in the course of this exercise or later, certainly, there will be opportunities to collaborate and to coordinate on our decisions here. Because where we really want to go in the end is to have agreement on how to answer these questions, and for each stakeholder to answer them as best they can to characterize their own local installation. But then these will be vote on fair data points with a very uniform metadata structure that'll be very easy then to do searches and analysis on later on. So that's where we were last week. And some of you were going ahead and answering these questions. So commendable. Thank you very much for everyone who tried to dig deep here and try to answer these questions. And what I would like to do today is to, as a group, we go through each of these 32 questions and we try to fill in the spreadsheet as much as possible as a group today. And we can have a discussion at any point. If there's a question that's unclear, people have questions, they can raise them and we can work it out. But hopefully in the next, 30 or 40 minutes, we can probably get through most of these questions and have a nice initial document here to start the next phase of decision-making here and consolidation. So what I will do is just remind everybody on the spreadsheet that these are the columns, and we have names listed here now. I don't know if everyone on the call is necessarily, or let's say it the other way around, that if everyone on the spreadsheet is necessarily represented on the call today. We may have people who are missing. That's okay. But I would say for everyone who's on the call right now, and you see your name here under this fair data point, especially if you are a coordinator or a country lead, go ahead and feel free to begin filling in the blanks here with us as we start going through it. And I'll pause here just to see if there's any questions, and maybe if Francesca has anything else to add at this point.
Otherwise, I can add something, Eric, since I also was in the preparatory meeting. This is Miriam.
Yeah. Hi,
I
Miriam.
think, yeah, I think that's a great way to go forward, very practical, and will help us to make a lot of progress. So thank you for setting it out, and I would say let's just start.
Okay, very good. So what I will do is I will follow here. I'm taking the answers here in my slides from column C of the spreadsheet. So if you just look down in the spreadsheet under the KIU fair data point, these are the answers that I have in my slide deck. And you know, I can work either from the slide deck or here on the spreadsheet, whichever is gonna be easiest. But at least you have this in the slides for afterwards. Look at then, at the highest level here, fair data point, there's 9 questions. And the first question is we need a title for the fair data point. And one of the suggestions that we had, but certainly is up for debate, but in this case, I believe this is Francesca and Mariam were answering the KIU fair data point. And to be clear, what's being asked in this category is just free text. So you're really free to answer it in any way you like, whatever is going to be most appropriate to help a human being understand who's, you know, where this fair data point is and what it's representing. So we could, as one possibility as well, answer this, and I don't have an answer, I'm just kind of brainstorming. But if we want a human user to know that this is a vote on fair data point, we may be wanting to answer this as vote on, a vote on fair data point with some KIU designation, for example. And I'm offering this, again, simply as a suggestion. This is a point of discussion that we should have later on.
But Eric, if I can say something on that,
yeah,
I think that, yeah, if you look at the future, and we're really looking at the fair data point helping us with patient data, I'd say it would be almost more logical to say KIU and University Hospital fair data point, because the designator here is not COVID, although that is the focus of our starting point. But if this is going to help us, it will be to switch to different interests as they emerge into the future. So then I think that the title should really be a description of what it services, which is here KIU Science and University Hospital of KIU. I don't know what Mariam thinks. Mariam is on the call. And she is more of an expert on that. Mariam, what is your thought?
Well, I actually think it would be more logical if it started with, okay, let me say like Kampala International University, then fair data point, because it's not only going to have COVID-19 data, it will have a variety of catalogs as well, different diseases, I believe. So I don't think the title should.
And it could also really serve the academic data from basically any, like for instance, in the point of the University of Sus, these are COVID data, but they are not necessarily just patient data. They could be data from a PhD student on the media and COVID or anything. So to me, I see Eric typing. This means here the institution that verifies data and giving some emphasis on the kind of these data. That is why you could mention the university hospital in the sense that it is very important in the starting project, but maybe that is what you want to put not in the repository, but in the next layer in your slide 12, Eric. That is maybe where you then designate between the different elements of the fair data points. But I agree with Mariam that it should be, since it's such a big thing, the fair data point, it should serve a variety of data where there's an interest in making them fair, definitely also scientific data. Right, Mariam?
Yeah.
I think Bert is also making a point in the chat room. If Charles would like to take a look at that.
Yes, this is Bert.
Yeah, so
I thought that maybe it could be helpful if you have an additional component where you make a link to the project, in this case, Vote on Africa, because then at a later stage, it would be relatively easy to, for instance, list or filter on all these fair data points. Take into account that over time, you may have a large number of fair data points, and it could be useful to link them to a specific project.
But I don't really understand so much in the sense that the fair data point has to be there for a long time to come, whereas the project is there only for a short time. I mean, I hope also that we will be getting beyond COVID at some point. So why should the identity be based on a reality that is now, but might be not the case in even 6 months' time?
You could have, of course, multiple projects. You could have multiple projects. So maybe at a certain stage, you may use the same fair data point for another project and yet another project.
Yeah, but then you're not going to change the name. So you're going to keep it.
Change the name. So, you know, I would, you know, my recommendation would be to have an additional component where you would link it to one or multiple projects. That was my idea. But I have to listen to Eric, what he, if there is, let's say, if that's feasible.
But is it about feasibility or is it about desirability? I don't see what is to be gained with that.
Well,
I believe the main question for everyone would be, for all these data points that are being created, do we need long-term association with Vodan? If we do, then how do we want to highlight that? Do you want it in the title? Do we want them as co-publishers of the fair data points? Or do we want, or is it that when in the metadata that is set up for the data point, Vodan should not feature anywhere? Because that's the question. If we do not want Vodan to have continuous association with the fair data points, then there is no reason at all to put them there. However, I feel as a matter of recognition or tracking these data points vis-a-vis others, from a point of origin, you may need some element of recognition of the Vodan project, even if the Vodan project dies eventually, or is closed, or it comes to an end. But maybe it's not the title. It's as Bart is saying, maybe you need another component or a co-component that can be used to log that factor.
Yeah, to me, I can just simply say that from the project, the Vodan project, there is no requirement for it to be identified. It is just that it should establish the fair data points so that we can do better data analytics. But so unless there is another reason, it's not a requirement.
Yeah, so this is a great, I have to mention, this is a great discussion. This is, I think, where we really want to be in a metadata for machine workshop. And these are the exact issues that need to be discussed within a community. Decisions need to be reached, and then we know what our metadata components are. And so this is wonderful. I'm really happy with this. Let me say a few things. Right now, we are at the highest level, the fair data point. We have other levels to go, right? We will, in the next slide, go to catalogs. It could be very well that we have a fair data point called KIU fair data point, and then we have different catalogs. And one of those catalogs could be University Hospital KIU. Yeah? Or one of these catalogs could be, Vote on Project catalog.
Yeah.
So indeed, these are all really critical pieces of metadata that we want to keep and track, but then we have to figure out how best to configure our data and our metadata to allow people and and machines to be able to find these things and to do analytics on them. And this is an excellent example of the kind of thinking we have to go through in order to achieve fair data. In most cases, right, in traditional research settings where a researcher is maybe not very skilled in metadata creation and maybe not even have an interest in it, these considerations are never thought of, right? It's always, hey, I will produce data and I will publish it in a paper and I'm done. But here in the world of fair data, the stakeholders really have to think about this. And so it's excellent that we are raising these issues. At this moment, I'm actually less concerned about the answers. It's great just to have the discussion. And we should be recording this. You know, I'm trying to keep notes here because we will want to, you know, formally come back to this and maybe even write a document that says, you know, these were our considerations. These are our decisions that we made. And that could even become a kind of official policy document of the Vote on project or the Vote on community going forward.
And the participants as well can log their opinions in the chat box.
If I say something, Charles, I think, yeah, the Modern Africa, now we have the Modern Africa Foundation, and it is our hope that it's going to be functional for a very long time. And this is part of a project of the Modern Africa Foundation. I think there could be, just like Beth suggested, to have some components to identify this set of fair data points, that at this point in the Modern Africa life history, this particular project was done. So there could be some form of description as well, maybe in the description, or create a different field to actually identify this present set of FDPs as the Modern Africa Foundation's Modern FDPs. Like the case of KIU, as pointed out by Miriam, there's going to be definitely some other kind of data. And I assume that's going to be the case for most of the other FDPs as well. There could be some other kind of data, like graduate students' work, like some other research. May not be limited to even hospital or healthcare data alone, but I still want us to have a way of identifying this project with the Modern Africa. Because by the time these are kind of indexed by Louis, someone saying it should be able to, oh, actually, there's something Modern Africa, is that so? Where can I get more information and all that? That's my feeling, my opinion.
And so Francesca, that is excellent. And check this out. In the chat window, I also included a link to something called a nano publication for the Vote on community. And I'm gonna say that this is highly experimental, but we can actually do it. And if you click on that link, and I don't know if you'll be able to see the text on your computer. This is what we call a nano publication. Yeah. Okay. This is what we call, a nano publication. And this is, we think of it as a self-contained publication. It's written entirely in a machine actionable format. This is RDF. And there's different sections here. Oops. There's different sections here. There's the header here, which is just all the ontologies that we're using. There's the assertion in blue. And then there's some provenance and publication info. So this is just kind of, you know, metadata about the nano publication. And what we're saying in this assertion is that there is a community called Vote On Implementation Network. And that's the only thing this publication does is to assert that there is a community called Vote On Implementation Network. Now, the cool thing about the cool thing about this is that this nano publication has a unique identifier, which is the URL that you use to find this thing. And what we can do is embed this nano publication as metadata in the FAIR data point. We can kind of interlink this nano publication in our FAIR data point. And then without having to say it explicitly, every machine will be able to know that this FAIR data point or this catalog or this data set belongs to the Vote On Implementation Network. Now, publishing these nano publications is pretty straightforward. There's actually a tool that it's almost like a CDAR template. We can make this very easy to publish. And then, for example, we could have a nano publication for the Vote On Africa Foundation. Yeah, or we could have a nano publication for the hospital, or we could have a nano publication for the country if we wanted. Whatever community designation we would like to make that we think is important, we could mint a uniquely identified statement of that. And that can be a kind of tag that would follow different data assets. And this is getting a little bit advanced, but it's just to mention that, you know, in a discussion like this, these things come up. And we are starting to build up a library of solutions that might be able to answer it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think we'll keep on going with filling the documentation before we move to some of the questions highlighted in the chat box.
Good, excellent. And maybe,
Eric, then on the, I mean, I don't have any problem in having identifications, like for instance, Vodan. My issue was more on the general title, because you don't want, in my view, you don't want the FAIR data point defined by the project. The FAIR data point should serve a community, and it should be clear which community that is. Now, you could have additional descriptors that make it then linkable to a particular interest or particular project, and that could be in this case Vodan, unless you decide to put it in the in that next layer. What do you call it? The slide 12. The catalog. Yeah. So is this something that you feel is part of the FDP 9 components, or is this more level of a catalog? And then if it is level of catalog, it's still also a question, because if you have general patients' data before they go into the DHIS system to make the machine readable, as per the question of Reginald in the chat, then the hospital's interest would be, I thought, to have the patient's data investigatable, and then some element of that can be relevant for COVID-19 and can be Vodan. So then Vodan would actually come as a subcategory of the hospital. But there could be other data that are also relevant from Vodan, which are not coming under a hospital, but which come from a political scientist in KIU, which could still have relevant information on Vodan. So at what level would you then place that?
Well, I will make a suggestion myself, but maybe I come to it a little bit later. Because I'm going to suggest that we maybe even tag individual data sets as belonging to VODON. But you know, it's just one suggestion. But let me also remind everybody. So great comments, Miriam. And again, you know, to the degree that we can track these different points of view, you know, record them here. I'm trying to do that a little bit in my notes. But if there's another way that we can be sure to record these issues, then this is really a nice basis to come back and make sure we really answered the questions that we needed to in the right way. But I will also just remind everybody that who's listening here and who might have access to one of these fair data points, that you can also answer as well as you can along with us here. And I'm going to go to question number 2, which is the description of your fair data point. And again, this is just a human readable text designed for people. And you know, one of the recommendations we had was this fair data point contains metadata of data sets and other artifacts related to the COVID pandemic at Kampala International University, for example. And this is, again, how we describe this fair data point will be dependent on the scope that we give it. Maybe this is more than just COVID. Maybe it's more than VODON. Maybe it is restricted to KIU University and the data that it produces. But these are, you know, decisions that have to be made, and then an appropriate description authored for that. And so again, in the spreadsheet, these are things that one could fill out here. Yeah, very nice. So I think description and title are pretty closely linked. Maybe the description is a justification for the title that you give. The publisher, as we say, is should be considered kind of really the owner of the fair data point. And whoever we list as publisher should understand that this is really, you know, a kind of legal responsibility here. It's a pretty serious decision. It's an official, it should be seen as an official document then of the organization that is the publisher. So we really need to make sure that it's cleared through all the proper channels and that everything is compliant to the wishes of that organization. And I see answers coming in, very nice. Versioning is pretty straightforward. It's just asking you for the version number. And I think what we're doing here is in fact creating version 1. When we launch these fair data points and we see that we need to make adjustments, or we want to augment them, or somehow alter them, then we come back and we decide on what version we'd like to do. And, you know, is I think in keeping with how we usually think of version numbers, every fair data point will be versioning in its own way. And that's under the discretion of the people who maintain that fair data point, when to call it a new version or when to update. So that's pretty straightforward. Number 5 here, the language, is asking for the human language in which the data assets are represented on the fair data point. And this could be English, it could be French, it could be a more traditional African language, for example. And what we're doing here is we're linking, and what's being asked for here is not just a human readable version of English or of the language description. So for example, if I were to answer English, you know, there's a subtle difference between British English and American English. Some might say not so subtle, but there's a difference there. And what we really want is as specific a designation as possible. If I go to this link here, this loc.gov vocabulary ISO 6391 English, if you go to that link, it's taking you to the US Library of Congress, which runs a linked data service, and it gives you a way of linking to an ISO specification of human languages. And so what this is a bunch of metadata about the English language, and this is all machine actionable. So what you're seeing here is a human readable link, but that link will also allow the computer to understand what's going on here, to interpret that. And so there's also a link here. We give one to French, but you might, if you're interested, just try searching on this linked data platform to see if you can find other languages that might be relevant for your FAIR data points. In the next category, we have license. And again, we're linking out to a digital license. This is at the Creative Commons. And this particular license that we've recommended is a pretty open and pretty permissive license. Again, if this is running at KIU, it's probably wise that KIU administration is aware of the licensing agreements here and is satisfied with the CC BY 4.0 license that we've linked it to. This was just a suggestion. It's not meant to be an across-the-board answer for everybody. And this is maybe something else that we could also have a discussion on. We could even bring in an expert on digital licensing and maybe even a lawyer at some point to help us understand the differences between the license that we have here and some others that might be more suitable. And again, these are things that are certainly subject to revision later on if we want to. 7 and 8 are pretty straightforward. They're just start dates of the FAIR data point and an update time frame for the FAIR data point. And I think it's asking this from you. It just wants a day and a date and a day, a month, and a year specification. So indeed, we can write down when these FAIR data points are up and when we update them. And then the institution country is asking again for a link, for a machine readable link to your institution and country. And what we did was we linked to a platform called Wikidata. And Wikidata has, I think, most, if not all of the countries with a wiki page, essentially. But again, what's special about Wikidata is that this is all machine actionable. This is all RDF behind the scenes. So a machine can interpret this page and it can understand all these statistical features of each of these countries and different official names and alternative names, short names, etc. So by linking to this Ugandan link, we really get rid of ambiguity and we know exactly what country we're talking about. And it's something that if you're from, if you want to link to a different country, the Wikidata platform is a really good place to go. And certainly you're going to get some very nice machine actionable data representing your country without any ambiguity. So to the degree that we can answer these questions, we've already completed the metadata for the highest level of the FAIR data point. And this is looking good. Yeah, and I think for the language, for example, or the licensing, these are things that we could just copy across the board, right? That it's likely that the licensing will be common between all these FAIR data points. in the language. Okay. Any questions at that point? Any observations?
So far, none in the chat box, other than one which we will cover when you are done. But I think we can continue.
Very good, Charles. And by the way, what's nice is that a lot of these questions are repeated at each of the metadata levels. And so by spending our time here and kind of answering the questions, we get a lot of insight how to answer the rest. Excuse me. So here's the catalog. In this case, we're only asking for 5 metadata components. And again, there's a title, a description, a publisher, a version, and a language. And again, these are inherited from the level above. So although I think it makes a lot of sense for us to make sure that we answer these explicitly, so we really are sure that we're doing the right thing, it is the case that in this DCAT vocabulary, this metadata structure, that these will be inherited from above as well. But then again, it's really coming down now, you know, answering these questions 1 and 2 are really about the scope of our ambitions and what we want to recognize and how we want to recognize it. So are these catalogs for KIU related data? Are they catalogs about VODON related data? Are they catalogs of patient medical records? It's incumbent upon the data stewards to figure out the answer to those questions. And what I would like to do as GoFair is just to make sure that we have a coordinated set of answers. So as common a group decision as we can get, so that we can achieve a high level of uniformity across all these FAIR data points. So these are discussions.
Eric?
Yeah.
This is Miriam. Would it be possible, before we go into the 5 lines under the catalog, to go again through the 4 layers and understand what the lowest layer is? Like, for instance, is the lowest, if you did patient data, is the lowest layer the data point related to this one patient on this one day? Or what is the lowest denominator in the 4 layers? Or is it, for instance, the whole patient data of every patient on a day today? Should we not know the layers of the structure so that then we know what we should catch at the level of the catalog?
Well, absolutely. We should, I think once we get a familiarity with the FAIR data point structure, it's going to be everything that we need to start making these decisions. And it's okay. We don't have to talk much more about the catalog because we've already answered these questions at the level above. And so I think, already know how to answer these questions now. These are free text answers for title, for description. We have to find, who's the responsible publisher of this. There's a version and a language. So if we go to the next layer down, the data set, and what I can do, Miriam, is kind of give you an overview of both of these last 2 layers, just so you have the complete picture.
Nice.
Yeah, so here's the data set metadata. So every catalog can have 1 or many data sets. And again, you see mostly the same sort of questions again: title, description, publisher, version, language, license, and some other things. Within the data set, there's something called the distribution. And this is, so for example, imagine if you have an Excel spreadsheet, and we could label that spreadsheet as, you know, a .csv. A CSV file is a kind of spreadsheet file, tabular data. However, we might rewrite that data, that tabular data, in the form of, say, a text document. Or we might write it as in the form of a PDF document. And many other file types. It's the same data, it's the same content, but it's being represented in different formats. And that's what distribution is getting at. There's some subtleties here, but distribution is basically your file format. And so this is pretty technical. The lowest level here is pretty technical. It's about the file format. But the data set is still very content related, very much data related. So, you know, there's title, there's description, there's publisher, version, language, license, a date that when it was issued, a date when this was modified. So maybe this, so if we talk, for example, now about a patient case report form, that form was created on a particular day, and that might be when we call this the issue date. It may be that that form is revised later on with additional information. Then we can say it was modified on a certain day. There's a couple of other things going on here in the data set. There's something called keywords, and there's something called theme. And I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet here and take us into keywords. The keywords is basically this, what we always think of, or what we typically, a keyword. It's just a single word that reminds us or has some relation to or association with that topic of that data. So if I write a research article on coronavirus, I could have as a keyword coronavirus, or virology, or COVID-19, or infectious disease. It's just a bunch of terms that help us when searching in a larger context to locate this data because it's relevant to those terms. And the keywords are really just that. They're human readable keywords. And you can put in as many as you would like, and they can be whatever you would like. Again, there's a moment for coordination here. We could agree that at least in the vote on context, there's a certain set of keywords that we like to reuse. And it's not to say that everybody in the world has to use only these, but maybe for us in the vote on project, we will agree to a certain set of keywords. Or let's say we will at least share keywords with each other so that they can have a chance of being reused. The theme is a little bit different. The theme is basically a keyword for the computer. And what they're looking for here are URIs, URLs, so intranet links, web links, to concepts and to pages that are related to our data set. And so these could be, I showed in a previous lecture how you can link out to malaria is transmitted by mosquitoes. These are concepts that we can find in ontologies, and we can link to them. And the computer then would be able to understand, a link to the coronavirus that's described in technical detail. The computer would understand that much better than just a keyword of coronavirus, which the computer would have a hard time to interpret. So keywords and themes are just ways to kind of build up a cloud of association, conceptual associations around our data so that they can be easily found later on. And that's this is worth having discussions about these keywords and these themes.
Can you give a specific example, Eric? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
For the number 10, maybe if you fill in one of these, then because I'm also entering the information for Ethiopia, the general information for the Ethiopian FDPs.
Sure. So, so let me see if I go, I'll go back to my nano publication here. If I go to bio portal.
Okay.
So here I am at bio portal. And we could search for a class like COVID. So here's a list of terms. Here's a COVID-19 ontology. Here's a COVID vaccine. Let's go to the ontology, or let's go to this, yeah. So this is an ontology, and let me see if I can find oh, yeah. Yeah, let's just go to so it looks like these are different isolates of corona. Let me see what happens here. Yeah, so this is a particular coronavirus, and if this was, for example, an isolate in your data set, then this link here one of your themes, because this would be a unique identifier then to this particular coronavirus isolate. And this is just an example. If with a little bit of time here, I can probably come up with better examples for us. But I think it suffices to show that there are resources out there that will contain terminologies that we can link to that are very much going to be related then to our to the data sets in our FAIR data points. And this is a discussion that I would like to come back to later, because this is there's sort of a subtle art then to figuring out how to link out to related terminologies. And I think what's nice too is that with having so many people involved in this project, we can probably figure out ways to group people into teams that can maybe handle some of these specific areas. So for example, we could have a team and maybe like a webinar where we spend an hour working through some coronavirus searches, or let's say like COVID-19 related searches for related concepts. And we can then put those into our theme categories. Another way to do this might be to go into the electronic case report form. In that form will be a large number of different concepts, obviously related to COVID-19. And we can borrow that list of terminology also for our themes. if what we're talking about is in fact related to these case report forms. And this is another kind of skill and another activity that we imagine the data steward becoming more and more competent at, sort of just becoming more and more aware of and competent with the use of ontologies and vocabularies that are out there, examining data sets, and then making judgment calls about how to create thematic metadata or keyword metadata relevant to those data sets. So that's really a kind of skill. It's a kind of training that could even happen to make sure this kind of thing gets done. Yeah. I'm looking at the clock. I don't want to keep people too long, but just to mention the last two categories here, we have a contact point and a landing page. And the contact point would be a person or an office or some entity that we can put the coordinates here to contact that entity in case people want to know more about the data or have figure out what kind of access restrictions might be on that data, etc. So it's just a contact, and there's really a person there. It could be a data steward. We could list a telephone number, for example, or it could be really an office that you call in the hospital or elsewhere. But a contact point is just that. It's some way of getting in contact with people who can help you to further understand this data. And then a landing page is built into the FAIR data point because it may be that your data sets are already exposed somewhere else. And the FAIR data point is already sitting on top of an existing web interface. And then this is a place where you can put a link to those other web resources. In this case, I don't think that would be the case, but that's possible. And then just quickly with the distribution to kind of finish up here. Again, you see the familiar categories: title, description, license, issued, modified. And then we get to some interesting questions here. If these, and this is a question now for the data steward and for the IT professionals backing it all up, how are we going to serve up these patient case report forms or this or the other data? It could be that these things are downloadable. And if they are, then here is where you would place the URL for the download. However, the data may be accessible in not as a download, but much more as a kind of interface. So for example, an API, or it could be another fancy API called the Sparkle endpoint. But there's different ways of accessing the data in a more live and operational case. In that way, we want a URL to those APIs, to those interfaces. And then there's, so this is a decision that needs to be made, I think, in each case. Are these data sets downloadable, or are they really accessible and accessible to analysis maybe is through an API. And then there's this question of media type. And this is a little bit more complicated. It has to do with some subtleties about the file type, but maybe a little bit more than that. So what we've done is we've already linked to a file type, to a media type that will be congruent with the electronic case report form. So this RDF that will capture the patient data. And this is a term, more about it here. And this is a good canonical reference for that media type. And of course, there's more things we could say there if we wanted to. Format is more of a human readable description of your file format. So if you had a CSV file or a text file, you could say so there. I think for us, we can we don't have to answer because the media type will contain that information for us. And then lastly, there's some indication of the file size, and I won't say the file size, the byte size, the information quantity associated with your data set. And this is not hugely relevant to us here because the file sizes are going to be pretty small in general. But imagine if you were clicking onto a data set that was a petabyte in size, you don't want to start downloading that, only to find out 3 weeks from now that you're downloading a petabyte of data. So it's nice to have some indication up front. What's the magnitude of the data that you're working with? So those are the elements there. You know, and what I can urge is that we do our best to try and come up with answers. And once we have a set of answers, I can guide the discussion from there. But this is what I would say for the next steps. Once we get these answers in this spreadsheet, then we need to have a discussion and some kind of process whereby the Vote on Africa project here, or maybe the foundation, can come to an agreement on what these answers ought to look like. And I think some of these are pretty straightforward. Others might take a little discussion. But once we have those answers, we can then return, and we have an agreement, we can return to our FAIR data points, and we can then configure them with the answers. And we know that these will be then a pretty uniform set of vote on related answers. And if needed, we can always come back with another webinar to help guide, you know, how does this information get into the FAIR data point? Like I said, it should be pretty straightforward. Upon booting up the FAIR data point, you can simply click on edit, and then you can just edit these links and these specifications right into the metadata. But we can always do that as a group or through a webinar if needed as well. So with that, I'm going to leave that here for now. Any questions? And Charles, do you want to maybe help us with the time frame and the questions here at the end?
Well, in terms of time, we don't have much left. Actually, we are well within past the 1 hour mark. But there's been a question that was raised in the chat box with regards to the DHIS systems that most of the country use or governments use to handle the health data. Dr. Reginald was asking how exactly will the integration between the FDP and the health information system actually work? Because even as one of the stewards was showing, access to the system is highly controlled. So you need authentications even to access some of the data. And I believe as part of a discussion that is being highlighted in the chat box is some of the data cannot even be visited. So even linking to it might be a problem. So I don't know whether Dr. Reginald is still on so that he can explain to us, as well as I see Mariam came up with an idea of what a solution would be, but maybe on hearing it, you can give us further direction on the same. Because maybe that might be one of the systems that we may need a guided webinar for if you're trying to link your data to that system.
But Charles, at the moment, it is not possible because DHIS has its own internal logic and, as you say, authentication procedures. And I mean, you just can't get in. So the input of the FAIR data will be separate. But what is possible probably and can be researched is that the input in the machine-readable FAIR data, which the DHIS or HIS systems, they're not machine-readable. So the logic then would be, because FAIR is based on the residency of the data, the visiting through the residency, is that the FAIR data would then be linked to input in the DHIS, especially if the FAIR data would cover the same fields. So it would be prior to DHIS, because DHIS doesn't necessarily stay in residence, but goes to the central DHIS cloud-based solution. So the relationship needs to be further investigated, but what is certain is that at this point, FAIR is not integratable in DHIS. In the future, it could be possible that DHIS would adopt FAIR, but that's a long way away, because we haven't started those conversations yet, but it could be possible in the long run that FAIR could be a component of DHIS. But at the moment, those conversations have not yet taken place.
Just to find all the hospitals or university hospitals using similar systems, or are others different enough such that they are FAIR compatible?
I don't think that there are systems that are in and of themselves FAIR compatible, but DHIS is very much used in Africa and Asia. In the Netherlands, we are not using DHIS, we have other systems. So there needs to be work done on those systems and information flows and how FAIR relates best to that. What is clear is that FAIR does not overlap with those systems, and that those systems could very much benefit from FAIR once that work was done, because once you have them machine readable, that can interlink with any system. So that is then more a matter of development and construction.
All right.
Well, maybe it's worth mentioning as well, you know, the FAIR data point was designed as a, you know, as having the potential to be a layer that could sit on top of an existing repository, and therefore helping to make the data in that repository a little bit more fair just by, you know, exposing the metadata. And so I think here, in many cases, we're using it as a dedicated repository in and of itself, but we could certainly go to, I don't know, maybe a DHIS repository, and some elements of that repository could be exposed into a FAIR data point, and making that data a little bit more fair. That's a perfectly valid use of a FAIR data point. And what's nice about this is that you don't have to expose or link to anything that you consider to be too sensitive for doing that. So it's really like, if we just want to announce that there's a case report of a COVID patient, this can also be something that's expressed in a FAIR data point linked to a DHIS service as well.
I'm not sure whether there are any more questions from the participants, because the chat box seems to be quite quiet, if I can say so. So last chance to get a question in. Going once, going twice. I guess that's it. We have come to the end of the 11th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. I think this one was a great one. There were a lot of discussions going on, both during the presentation and in the chat box. I'd like to appreciate everyone that took the time to be here. The recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Vodan Africa website. So in case you missed part of it, or you would like to review the topic, as I'm sure most of us want to do, so be sure to check that one out. We'll also be having another metadata for machines workshop next week on Tuesday, so be sure to check the communication channels for details on the timings. I'd like to thank Eric for having time today to be with us. Hopefully you'll be available next week as well for the next session. Like we said, if a guided webinar is required, just forward those requests, whether via the WhatsApp groups or the Slack channel, and then we can see how it can be organized. I don't know whether there are any closing remarks from Francisca or Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Oh, okay. Professor Miriam wants to say something.
No,
By
go
all
ahead,
means.
Francesca.
Yes, just to say thank you to everyone. And then as a kind of teaser towards next week, we're going to be having one of the teams, two of the teams actually are going to be making presentation on their journeys, one on CEDA and the other one on the setting up of the FDP on the server in the ICT center.
All right, that sounds like an interesting one. Professor Miriam, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I also just wanted to appreciate everybody and thanks Eric for a very detailed walkthrough and very careful preparation with Francesca, and Charles, thank you for moderating. And just a very small suggestion for the webinars, maybe to add to the titles the topic, so that it might be a little bit easier to find them, because since now we have so many installments already, that way they can be used maybe a little bit easier for particular topics where people are looking for that.
Yep.
And yeah, was very good. I look forward to next week, the CEDAR presentation with Dr. Mariam from the SUS University, and then we also hope to come up with a planning for the next installments so that we know our planning ahead and when we will deliver the final connected fair data. Thank you, Charles.
Karibu sana. I guess that's a wrap. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you guys next time.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.